Well, hello, I'm John Hodgkinson. I've been working with biodynamics for about 25 years. I'm going to address today the basics which are going to be the preparations. And the first preparation we run into is horn manure. It's known as Horn Manure 500, and everybody asks, how come it has a number? And we're not absolutely certain, but we believe it came out of a response from Austria towards Germany around World War II, when it was much safer to have something like this new idea of energy and so on in agriculture to be given a scientific rigour. And that's how come it was given a number. And so the other preps also, which we'll come to later, were also given numbers. So traditionally, horn manure is used on its own, and it's an extremely powerful soil improver. It adds energy to the soil food web and makes it prosper enormously. And Alex Podolinsky, who originated biodynamic practice in Australia, decided it needed the addition of the preparations, the compost preparations to it, as a secondary ferment, if you like, after the horn manure was dug. Now, should go back to basics. Horn manure is fresh cow manure, stuffed into cow horns and buried in the rhizosphere, which is the top layer, the living layer of soil, over winter, in such a way that the heightened energies of winter are absorbed by the horn manure, and it's transformed into a friable, colloidal type of material which has enormous energy. And in the spring, when the horns are removed or lifted, that horn manure then is put into containers in a shed and subjected to a second process. We call it a secondary ferment. It's not actually a ferment, but we add the compost preps to it. Might have to stop this. When people start using biodynamics, it's a good idea to get it out straight away on the land. It doesn't have to be bare soil, it can be vegetation of all sorts of kinds, as long as it's not too tall and rank. And normally people would start doing it after the winter cool has gone in Australia. They'd be spraying in the spring, in the active times of the year, the spring, and very often after the late summer rains. Certainly in the east and south of Australia, we recommend that it goes when that growth spurt is on in the autumn, late summer and autumn. A couple of times a year would probably be sufficient for most situations. In intensive market gardening, however, it could go out, some people do it every month or even more. Maybe when they prepare a large bed for planting, they tend to put 500 on it straight away. Just before they plant, so they get the maximum benefits from this high energy preparation. And it depends on what you're able to do, depends on what you want to do with it. For instance, a lot of people say that using the preparations, and 500 is one of them, will enhance rain. It'll bring on extra rain. There is a specific way, what we call sequential spraying, which is over 3 days, which is designed to actually bring rain, but this tends to balance the soil, and it also has an effect on the atmosphere above the soil, which tends to bring things into balance. All about 500. Traditionally 500 was used on its own, but since Alex Podolinsky became very involved in biodynamics and originated the application of biodynamics in Australia, he started to put the compost preparations into a secondary process. So when the horns are lifted in the spring, after being in the soil over winter, they're emptied into a storage container where the compost preparations are added to it, and they imbue the horn manure with other energies which enhance the composting process in the soil. So this is actually prepared 500, and when it's put out on the soil, it tends to bring a composting gesture to the soil. So it's like aerial composting over an area, rather than just having a compost heap which you then have to apply separately. So this is a sort of two-in-one preparation. Prepared 500 it's called, and that's widely used around the world. Podolinsky originated in Australia, and it was adopted in Europe and now in America as well. So very few people use 500 on its own. It's still a very potent soil preparation, 500, but once it's had the compost preps added to it, it's vastly more potent and useful. Okay. In the case of a backyard, the rate for a hectare is 85 grams. The rate for a backyard is about 20 grams of 500. It just goes into the water, and you proceed doing this for an hour. Yeah, you really need to make yourself comfortable. and it's quite okay if you spread the load across a number of people. It's a fair amount of work, but it's one of those pleasure things where you can actually do it with a light heart and strong intent. Strong intent as to the magic that's going to come from this, the generation of fertility with a tiny amount of substance going over a larger area. This amount would be enough for about 1,000 square metres, or roughly a quarter of an acre. An ordinary Australian backyard, this would be enough to do. Now when you get close to the end of the hour, you'll notice that the water becomes very silky smooth and quite a different texture to the water, and its reflectivity. It looks a little bit like, you see little rainbows and spectra. You see the little spectrum of light coming off it towards the end. And why is it an hour? Well, it's to do with cosmic rhythms and the number of heartbeats that humans do in a day or a lifetime and so on. So those sort of inspired ideas of what time represents in the cosmos have been put together by Steiner in the early days, and we've tended to follow that pattern. And there is something that seems to show that an hour is the right time for it. Okay? Using a half brush. Lots and lots of droplets, and you can walk fairly steadily with it. You don't have to cover every square centimetre. This has a lot of power, and each droplet actually contains enough energy to do quite a large area. So we're putting out vastly more than just one droplet, say, per square metre, and that's fine.